Íslensk stjórnvöld undirbúa nú beiðni efnahagsaðstoð frá Alþjóðagjaldeyrissjóðnum. Þetta fullyrða heimildamenn fréttastofu innan ríkisstjórnarflokkanna.
Það bara bókstaflega eina leiðin sem vit í.
We economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire. And we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point, we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you lost a lot of money, can't pay your debts, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote. To have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized and sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So there was that whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the way the IMF and the World Bank work, that you put a country in debt, it's such a big debt it can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest, and you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or good governance, which means basically that they've got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems sometimes, their penal systems, their insurance systems, to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy.
Ég vil bara segja það að fólki sem vinnur hjá Alþjóðagjaldeyrissjóðnum er í fremstu röð, það fer í gegnum mikla eldhreinsun að komast að í þessari stofnun, og það kemur frá öllum þjóðum heims, líka þeim þjóðum sem hafa gengið í gegnum svipaða erfiðleika og við erum að kljást við núna. Svo það er okkur afar heilbrigt, held ég, að fá að heyra og fá reynslu þeirra og njóta þeirra aðstoðar. Ég held það nú. Og sjóðurinn hefur fengið slæmt orð á sig gagnvart vanþróuðum ríkjum.
Ecuador for many, many years had been ruled by pro-U.S. dictators, often relatively brutal. Then it was decided that they were going to have a truly democratic election. Jaime Roldos ran for office, and his main goal, he said, as president would be to make sure that Ecuador's resources were used to help the people. And he won, overwhelming, by more votes than anybody had ever won anything in Ecuador. And he began to implement these policies to make sure that the profits from oil went to help the people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. I was sent down as one of several economic hitmen to change Roldos, to corrupt him, to bring him around, to let him know, okay, you can get very rich, you and your family, if you play our game, but if you continue to try to keep these policies you've promised, you're going to go. He wouldn't listen. He was assassinated. As soon as the plane crashed, the whole area was cordoned off. The only people allowed in were U.S. military from a nearby base and some of the Ecuadorian military. When an investigation was launched, two of the key witnesses died in car accidents before they had a chance to testify. A lot of very, very strange things that went on around the assassination of Jaime Roldos. I, like most people who've really looked at this case, had absolutely no doubt that it was an assassination. And of course, in my position as an economic hitman, I was always expecting something to happen to Jaime, whether it be a coup or assassination, I wasn't sure, but that he would be taken down because he was not being corrupted. He would not allow himself to be corrupted the way we wanted to corrupt him. It is interesting to me how this system has continued pretty much the same way for years and years and years, except the economic hitmen have got better and better and better.
Ég talaði við aðalhagfræðing sjóðsins og ég mátti hafa eftir honum. Þetta ekki yfirlýsing frá honum, ekki yfirlýsing frá sjóðnum, heldur persónulegt samtal. Og hann segir, Alþjóðagjaldeyrissjóðurinn var búinn til þess að hjálpa aðildarríkjum sínum, þar á meðal Íslandi. Það getur hjálpað fjárhagslega og það getur hjálpað með því að hanna lausnir, áætlanir. Hann búinn að hjálpa mörgum löndum áður sem hafa átt við bankakreppur að stríða og hefur mikla reynslu á þessu sviði. Ég vona mjög mikið að þeir samþykki hjálpa okkar.
They must maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs.
This process of manipulation by the corporatocracy through the use of debt, bribery, and political overthrow is called globalization. Just as the Federal Reserve keeps the American public in a position of indentured servitude through perpetual debt, inflation, and interest, the World Bank and IMF serve this role on a global scale. The basic scam is simple. Put a country in debt either by its own indiscretion or through corrupting the leader of that country, then impose conditionalities or structural adjustment policies, often consisting of the following. Currency devaluation. When the value of a currency drops, so does everything valued in it. This makes indigenous resources available to predator countries at a fraction of their worth.
Svo að peningamálakerfið, gjaldmiðillinn, gengiskráningin, utanríkisviðskiptin allt í uppnámi.
Large funding cuts for social programs. These usually include education and healthcare, compromising the well-being and integrity of the society, leaving the public vulnerable to exploitation. Privatization of state-owned enterprises. This means that socially important systems can be purchased and regulated by foreign corporations for profit.
Og þarna stofnun sem búin til, skipulögð, hefur áratugarreynslu af því að hjálpa löndum að byggja upp svona kerfi þegar það hrunið.
A cursory glance at the performance record of the World Bank reveals that the institution, which publicly claims to help poor countries develop and alleviate poverty, has done nothing but increase poverty and the wealth gap, while corporate profits soar. In 1960, the income gap between the fifth of the world's people in the richest countries versus the fifth in the poorest countries was 30-1. By 1998, it was 74-1. While global GNP rose 40% between 1970 and 1985, those in poverty actually increased by 17%. While from 1985 to 2000, those living on less than $1 a day increased by 18%. Even the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress admitted that there is a mere 40% success rate of all World Bank projects. In the late 1960s, the World Bank intervened in Ecuador with large loans. During the next 30 years, poverty grew from 50% to 70%. Under or unemployment grew from 15 to 70%. Public debt increased from 240 million to 16 billion, while the share of resources allocated to the poor went from 20% to 6%. In fact, by the year 2000, 50% of Ecuador's national budget had to be allocated for paying its debts. It is important to understand the World Bank is, in fact, a U.S. bank supporting U.S. interests, for the United States holds veto power over decisions, as it is the largest provider of capital. And where did it get this money? You guessed it. It made it out of thin air through the fractional reserve banking system. Of the world's top 100 economies, as based on annual GDP, 51 are corporations, and 47 of that 51 are U.S.-based. Walmart, General Motors, and Exxon are more economically powerful than Saudi Arabia, Poland, Norway, South Africa, Finland, Indonesia, and many others. And as protective trade barriers are broken down, currencies tossed together and manipulated in floating markets, and state economies overturned in favor of open competition and global capitalism, the empire expands.
Við erum ekki vanþróað ríki. Við erum í fremstu röð eins og Katrín segir. Hér öll stofnanauppbygging í lagi og síðast en ekki síst er ríkissjóður svo vel staddur að það í rauninni með ólíkindum.
Það ekki veikleikamerki að biðja ekki hjálp, það veikleikamerki að biðja ekki hjálp. Þetta eins og börnin hans verða fyrir slysi og maður hringir ekki til læknis af því að maður er of stoltur. Maður gerir ekki svoleiðis.